Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are in historic Newcastle, checking out one of its hidden gems, Jessop's Tavern. Tuck in that napkin and loosen that belt. The 302 is serving up a heaping helping of history. We're at Jessop's Tavern, where visitors to Newcastle can get a slice of history to go along with their food and fare. I'm joined now by the owner of the tavern, Justin Day, to talk a little bit about the storied history behind this great place. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So the original owner of the building is the namesake, correct?
Exactly. Abraham Jessup lived here in 1724. The house was built in 1674, so we're certainly in an old place. Abraham Jessup was a coopersmith, or what was known as a barrel maker, and that was a pretty important job back then. It was, as I often joke with customers, it was the FedEx or the UPS at the time. Mm-hmm. You would naturally you would expect things like liquor to be in there, but oftentimes it was spices, even clothing, because they had to keep this watertight, and being near the river and all these ports, that was a big deal. So part of this property that is the tavern actually used to be the backyard, and that's where he did a lot of his, or actually did all of his work. We actually found in the soil some old hammers and pieces of metal, and of course wood, but most of that disappeared, of course, after 300 years. So that's why we named it after him. Back in those days, there really weren't taverns. Taverns is more of a later on situation. They were called ordinaries. They were people's houses. Oftentimes, somebody would be traveling through town on a horse, and they would stop at someone's house and say, my horse is really tired. I'm really tired. Do you mind if I just rest here for a minute? And they're like, sure, why not? And then they would go on and say, hey, why don't you come in? And you know what? Why don't you have dinner? And have a beer. And then, you know what? It's getting late. Why don't you spend the night? And then everyone went, ding. They're like, huh. I said, maybe I can make money doing this. So that's how you got your B&Bs, so to speak, your inns. And then the taverns were specifically for drinking, where the inns were drinking and spending the night. Mm-hmm. So it's his house, it's his tavern. No one sleeps here except me when I'm tired. But that's where we get the name from, and it's a cool name.
So over the years, this building has served many different functions. Can you kind of give us the history once it goes from Jessop through the years to where you have it?
Sure. Like I mentioned before, the building was built in 1674, which is shortly after when the town was officially incorporated, so to speak, by Peter Stuyvesant, who was the Dutch influence here. Pretty scary-looking guy. And so it remained a house for most of the time. And then in 1724, like I mentioned before, Abraham Jessop bought it and made it a pretty important place. From there, it gets a little fuzzier. It was a house all the way through. It's been many incarnations, but it actually became, for the first time, it became a restaurant or a tavern, so to speak, in the 1950s, we believe. And that was called the Captain's Log, sort of a naval theme, saying the river.
or Star Trek.
Or Star Trek, yeah. Every time I think about that, that's what comes up, so It's hard to stop that. But then it became the Log Cabin, and then in 1974, it became probably its most famous incarnation, which was the Green Frog, and that's when it certainly became more of a watering hole, so to speak. 1974 was not when I was born, so it's even kind of apropos. So it became the Green Frog for about 20 years, and my family and I, we lived in southern Chester County, Pennsylvania, Oxford area, and we fell in love with this town. And both my parents were teachers, and they got laid off. And I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I decided that wasn't going to work. Too much work. Wanted to get my hands dirty. So my father actually saw the for sale sign go up on the Green Frog. It was up for one day. And he came to me and my mother and said, maybe we should open a restaurant. And we both were like, you're out of your mind. What do we know about running a restaurant?
Sure.
I mean, you're teachers, and I just got, I took 1 year of college. What do I know? So my mother and I actually walked around town for about an hour and went, can we pull this off? Should we do this? And what's plan B? So we said, let's give it a shot. My godparents helped give some money. They had some money to give, and we invested, and we turned the Green Frog into what you see now. The Green Frog was a little bit under the weather, and we wanted to really capitalize on the history of this town, and we were like, why has no one just gone right at all the nuances and history of this town? So we said, well, let's do that. So we essentially gutted the place and built it back to what it would be like in that time. So we actually, without knowing it, put the stairs back exactly where the stairs were.
Okay.
It was all just a random guess, and we were shocked when we pulled the boards off and saw the brick, and the notches where the joists would be were exactly, I think we were off like a half an inch.
Right.
So we put the stairs back where they were. We uncovered the fireplace that had been covered up and made it a gas fireplace. So when you walk in here, you really do get a pretty good idea of what the house was like.
You absolutely do. And we're going to talk more about the transformation process when we return.
I'm Jim Wolf, Secretary of the Duck Creek Historical Society and docent for the Smyrna Museum, and enjoy the history that we find on the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the reimagining or the rebirth of Jessop Tavern, as it were. Now, you said that you had to take everything down to the studs. I mean, is there anything in here that's original, you think?
I often get the question, the floor is original. The answer is no. But to answer your question, there are a lot of antiques in here that are from that time, but really it's the original brick walls and the stone foundation that is what keeps this place true to its heritage. We had to do a lot of renovating because when a place is that old, it tends to start falling apart, and it was falling apart. So we did a pretty good job of hiding a lot of the structural things needed to keep this place up. This place is solid as a rock. Don't worry about that. But we had to get very creative in hiding it. So we did. The stairs, we did put those back exactly like they were back in the 1700s, and we uncovered the original fireplace that unfortunately had been covered up and was damaged. We repaired it and put in a gas log. So we used to have a fireplace. Unfortunately, we no longer have that because after all this time, it too has become too fragile to continue to use gas. So now we use candles. Okay. So for about 20 years, we had a fireplace, and we were on a list for fireplaces.
Excellent. So this would be the fireplace to your right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Amazing. So whenever you're taking everything down to the studs, you mentioned in the backyard you found remnants from Jessop's time. Did you find anything in the walls? I know sometimes people find newspapers or things like that.
Absolutely. Weirdly enough, a lot of children's shoes.
Really?
Have more questions than it answers, probably. But definitely newspapers from the 20s. Fortunately, nothing from the 1800s.
Yeah.
But quite a bit from the 20s. We saw some from the 40s, the 50s. A little bit of pottery, metal.
Yeah.
Nothing. No hidden golden treasure.
Unfortunately, yeah. Well, talk to us about the decor. I know you have a couple of portraits on the walls and some muskets. Talk to me about what you have.
Sure. Well, in giving the feel of what a place like this back in the time would, we obviously wanted to incorporate as many things as we could find locally and, of course, non-locally of the time. So the muskets on the wall are always a very big conversation piece. They're actually brown Besses. They're real. They were actually gifted to us from my godparents, who have a Civil War collection and a Civil War museum right next door.
Nice.
So that certainly added some creed to it. The murals on the wall, we actually somehow found in an inn, a smoked out, burnt out inn in New Jersey, that is actually an homage to what it would look like if you were in New Jersey looking back at Newcastle.
Okay.
So we cleaned those up, put them on the wall. The paintings around the place, some of it is just period pieces for people of that time. Some of the stuff is historical photographs from the time, and since we capitalize on the many countries' history here, some of the things on the wall are actually from those countries.
Mm-hmm. And which countries are you referring to?
Well, that's a big question. So,
okay.
Well, a big answer, I guess. So, Newcastle is a pretty important town. It originally was settled by the Swedish, and people go, "Wow, what, Sweden?" And then the Dutch came along, and then the British came along, and then we came along. So this particular town seemed to be at the mouth of the bay and was a pretty important spot to sort of camp. Actually, this town is where William Penn first set foot on American soil. So no one knows any of that, it seems like. And that was sort of, going back to what I said before, really wanted to get the word out about this tiny little town that no one knows. I mean, we lived an hour away and never heard of it. The only reason we were here is we went to the farmer's market. Mm-hmm. And someone said, "Oh, you should check out this town." And we felt like we went back in time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So those three countries are important. It encompasses our food, our drinks, our style, everything, because it was important.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your food, your drinks, and your style, and just the atmosphere that you try to create when we return.
Hi, I'm Nancy Alexander. I'm the director of the Rehoboth Beach Museum in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And I had a blast today sharing our city's history with the 302.
Welcome back. So when you walk through the doors here, as I said in the beginning, you get a slice of history along with the food. Talk to me a little bit about how you really try to make, in addition to, just the decor, you really try to take people back in time.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're also trying to give them escape from reality, to be honest with you. We also wanted to do that in a way that didn't come across as being a theme park. We didn't want to be Colonial Williamsburg. That's too dead on. We want this to be a livable place, a comfortable place where all are welcome. I mean, we have people in their 90s that come. We have bikers that come, children, everybody. So when you walk in the door, the first thing you see is we're all dressed in colonial garb, comfortably dressed in colonial garb. So because we tried that once, and I got a lot of pushback on bonnets and corsets, as you can imagine. So that's the first thing you see, and then obviously you see the place, and you see that this is obviously not your typical restaurant, and one thing that people seem to point out pretty quickly is there's no TVs. It's ironic that how much TV distracts us or engages us. So people come in, they love to come here because we don't have a television, and you get to talk to people. Other people are your entertainment, and you'd be amazed at the stories that I've heard over the last 25 years and how much people will actually enjoy talking to each other. So our foods and our drinks help showcase that. I mean, we dress British colonial, but throughout the entire restaurant on the menu and our drinks, it does reflect the Dutch, the Swedish, the English, and the Belgian. People ask me, why Belgium? Well, that's a tricky question, because Belgium didn't become a country until 1831. So before that, it was France and the Dutch sort of fighting over the land until they decided. So the Dutch were here, the Dutch were the Flemish became the Belgian, and the truth be told is the Belgians have the best beer. So it made sense to kind of add that fourth country in, not only for the beer, but for the culinary delights like mussels and things like that. So people come for that, for sure. Mm-hmm. And so over the course of 25 years, I've actually collected way more rare and interesting examples of all those beers than I ever thought I would. I currently have the largest beer selection in the state. I have like close to 400 plus bottles and 30 drafts. Even I'm not sure where I put it all. We're a tiny, tiny place with the big footprint.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, the detail. It's not like it's, incidental. Everything is deliberate when you come through the doors. Even when you open up the menu. Talk to me a little bit about all the thought that went into just presenting things and explaining things in context to the theme.
Sure. Well, we love history. I mean, my family, I grew up especially with all the stuff around me, so it's sort of in my blood. And history can be fun, and it can be very interesting. Sometimes it's hard to digest. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can seem like it's just overwhelming. So what we thought to do is we'll not dumb it down, but make it a little easier to digest, sort of give you the, nothing is more convincing than sort of living in it. So our menus are parchment paper that fold, and the script is, the font is of that. With all these beers, that's even more overwhelming when you have 400 beers. So I'm up to 2 separate books filled with pictures and descriptions. Because things can get things can get very overwhelming. If you see a picture and you see description, you're so much more likely to try something. And I my greatest joy that I get here among everything else is the person that goes, "Wow, I didn't know that."
Yeah.
Or, "I never would have tried that if I hadn't tried it here." Or, "I had no idea this town existed," or, "I had no idea that food existed." And that is essentially why we do what we do. The restaurant business is not known as a cash cow.
Right.
You do it with passion. You don't do it for the money. I tell everyone else, just don't bother. Just do it because you really like it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the food.
Sure.
I know our crew has been here a couple of times, and the boys love the shepherd's pie.
Sure.
And it's kind of your claim to fame,
Sure.
Am I right?
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of happened by accident, as most cool things do. We weren't necessarily intentionally trying to come up with a unique dish, but at the same time, we wanted something that would kind of stick out, sort of be over the top. Our first chef said, "Well, why don't we?" Traditionally a shepherd's pie would be in a little tureen, and typically you would see it at an Irish or a British pub. It's like, why don't we do something ridiculous? I said, why don't we just pile it up like really high? And we're like, well, how are we going to do that? So we found a mold, and we're still using the same molds, the same shape. Obviously, we've gotten newer molds. I've been using the same one for 25 years now. And so we did that, and it ended up being 2.5 pounds of food, and we're like, I don't know if anybody's going to eat that. And you're like, well, let's try it. What's the we're brand new. What's the worst that could happen? So the joke over 25 years is who can finish it, who should finish it, and who shouldn't finish it. Mm-hmm. The majority, it's the funnest. It's one of the funner parts is watching someone eat this, because it's always the last person you think that will finish it. It's never the big, burly guy, football player. It's the little demure lady that finishes the whole thing. I'll never forget the first year we opened in 1996. I had a lady come in, she got an appetizer, ate the entire shepherd's pie, and then had dessert.
Wow.
And she was probably 5 foot tall.
It's a mountain. I'm not going to lie to you. We had a couple people on our crew order it, and only one of them was able to finish it.
So we don't encourage people to eat it all. We encourage them to take it home.
Take it home.
Yeah, I quickly discovered you can take it home and you can throw it in a hot skillet the next day and put a fried egg on top and you have breakfast.
Delicious. Absolutely.
I mean, you'll sleep all day. But you'll
true.
feel pretty good about it, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to come and, check out the tavern, try the shepherd's pie or one of your bevy of beers, how do they get in contact with you? Are you on social, website?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's kind of ironic. So we stopped advertising.
Oh, I guess you don't have to.
Well, I guess the answer is sort of yes and no. I realized that people, when I say stopped advertising in newspapers.
Sure.
We became a word of mouth place. What we discovered is someone came, had a fantastic time, and told a friend. And then they told a friend, And that's, every time I'd put an ad in the paper, I had a hard time finding my own ad. Nothing against putting an ad in the paper, but just what I'm getting at is what this town, this restaurant sort of represent is a hidden treasure. Mm-hmm. There's a certain degree of that's something that only you know. And I always joke, you bring the friends you like, old Newcastle, you bring the friends that you're just okay with to a chain.
Right.
Because you kind of want to, this is sort of your special spot. So by no means are we an occasion place. We're packed all the time. I say it 100 times. We're the busiest restaurant that no one's ever heard of or ever been to.
So if someone's watching and they want to come and visit you and try the shepherd's pie or one of your, many, many beers, where do they get information on how to find you?
Well, we have a great website. We're all over Facebook and Instagram. But primarily that's where it starts. And then it just sort of rolls from there.
Excellent. Well, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Yep.
And we'll be right back. For more information on Jessop's Tavern, you can check out their website, jessops-tavern.com. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. We're going to leave you now with some beauty shots down by the water in historic Newcastle. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.